In this video, in this whole chapter, we're basically going to talk about what a NoSQL database is. Not just MongoDB, but all the different types of databases that are out there. Now, let's talk about what exactly NoSQL means. And if you want to get technical, NoSQL can be anything that's not a relational database like MySQL. It describes a different method of data retrieval, and it's modeled in a different way. But even a text file could technically be a NoSQL database. But usually when people talk about NoSQL database, they're talking about things like MongoDB and CouchDB or Couchbase. There's actually 4 different types of NoSQL databases, which I'll get into in a little bit. NoSQL databases are a growing industry and commonly used in big data and real-time web applications. And we're going to have a whole section on big data. It's basically just the massive amount of data that's out there, and relational databases are having administrators are having trouble with all that data, managing it through a relational database. So a lot of enterprises are actually moving to NoSQL. All the big names have already done this. Google built Bigtable back in, I think, 2004 or 5. Amazon built SimpleDB, which is a NoSQL database. So it's being used a lot at this time. Now, one issue I have with the name NoSQL is that it actually stands for not only SQL. So the name implies that SQL isn't possible or isn't wanted in the NoSQL database, and that's not true. You can actually use SQL, but it just makes it sound like not using SQL is what's good about this, and that's just not true. What's good about NoSQL is how it scales, how cheap it is, how cost effective, how much there's a lot less management than if you were using a relational database. And obviously we're going to go through all these advantages, but I just think that NoSQL wasn't quite the right name to call this. I would describe this more as a non-relational database. That makes a lot more sense to me, but who am I? So just wanted to get that out there. And I also want to say that doing this series, I'm not saying that relational databases are not good or you shouldn't use them. Both NoSQL and relational databases have their place, and sometimes it's better to use a relational database, sometimes it's better to use NoSQL. So I'm not going to be picking sides here. We actually just did a MySQL series, and I still use MySQL all the time, so I'm not biased. So let's take a look at some of the popular NoSQL databases. Of course, we have MongoDB, which is what this course will be on. It came out 2009 by developers called 10gen. And we're going to talk about the types, but MongoDB is a document database, which is one of the 4 types of NoSQL databases. Probably the most popular. But aside from MongoDB, we have CouchDB, which is pretty, it's been out for a while, 2005. Also a document database and built by Apache. Apache also has a column store NoSQL database, which we'll talk about, and that's called Cassandra. That was released in 2008. We also have Couchbase, not to be confused with CouchDB, which was released in 2011. Riek is a key value type of NoSQL database, and of course Amazon built SimpleDB back in 2007, which is a document database. Alright, so obviously we want to talk about the advantages of NoSQL. If an enterprise company is gonna be making a switch from relational databases to NoSQL, Obviously there needs to be a lot of advantages because that's a daunting task. So I'd say the main advantage is scaling. It's much easier to scale. NoSQL databases have a tendency to scale out while relational databases scale up, and I'll explain the differences in those two. It's significantly cheaper in many ways. It's less to manage. The administrators don't need to know as much as they would with a relational database. The hardware is significantly cheaper. So you're going to save a lot of money using a NoSQL structure. It's schemaless. All right. They say that it's schemaless, but in my opinion, it's partially schemaless. And what I mean is, it's schemaless in the sense that you don't have to define all your fields beforehand, but you do create some kind of schema on the application level, as opposed to like MySQL, where you have to just clarify every little detail of the fields and the field types and all that. It's much more free than a relational database. Less management, which we talked about, cheaper hardware, auto-sharding, which I'll talk about in a minute, and heterogeneous data. Alright, so we're going to go through each of these one by one. Alright, so scaling with NoSQL. If we go back maybe 10 years or so, if a web application or a website had 10,000 registered users, that was quite a bit. That was considered a pretty decent user base. Now, in 2014, that's nothing really. When we have applications and websites like Facebook with billions of users, you can imagine just the amount of data flooding that has gone on the past 10 years. And it can be a nightmare to manage data in this kind of magnitude with a relational database. One of the reasons, if not the main reason, that NoSQL databases were created was because they're designed to expand transparently with low-cost commodity hardware. And they do something called scale out, or horizontal scaling, while relational databases scale up, or vertically scaling. And what scale out is if you're running out of storage, or you have a hardware issue, you can just add on another node, another cheap server with commodity hardware to make your database bigger and more powerful. When you have a relational database and you want to scale, it usually will scale up, which means you have to beef up these big enterprise servers with new CPUs, more memory, more storage, and it just can be extremely expensive. Not only that, but extremely difficult. You need technicians that have a lot more knowledge than ones that could manage a NoSQL server. Alright, so again, scale up is basically the architecture where network storage is usually confined to a single form factor, and to scale it you need to add more resources, alright, to a single node. So that's basically what the common way to scale a relational database is. Scaling out is the architecture where the total amount of disk space can easily be expanded as needed, even if the drives are stored in different storage arrays. So when a storage array reaches its max, another one will pick up where it last left off. So there's a smooth flow, and this makes scaling significantly easier and less expensive. So let's talk about Schema-Less Design. When you're talking about MongoDB or other NoSQL databases, you hear the word schema a lot, and schema-less. And what that means is that the full schema is not mandated by the actual database system like it is with MySQL or other relational databases. Your schema is partially defined in the database management system and then defined from within your application. So where you really set up this structure and schema is in your application, not in the actual database. If you have a MySQL database that you're creating inside a tool like PHPMyAdmin, you need to specify every field and field type that you're going to use, or it just won't work. But with NoSQL, you can pretty much give one entry, say an author field, and then the next doesn't have to have an author field. It could have maybe a category field or something like that, and you can mix these up and your application stays intact. So that's one of the huge benefits of using a NoSQL database. Alright, so heterogeneous data. Alright, so as I said, we do not need to predefine all of our fields. Let's say that we have a relational database which has a products table. Alright, and this is for a computer repair shop. What if we want to display memory sizes on our memory products and CPU cores, the number of cores on our CPU products? Okay, so to do this in a relational database, there's actually a few different ways, but one of the ways would be to create one products table and have all our memory and CPU, all that, and then have every single field for every product. For instance, even if there's a memory item, you would still have that CPU core column, and that's just a total waste. Another thing you could do is you could create a junction table, and you could have the product and then the property of the product, but that's also just extra work, extra power. With NoSQL, you can just have a products collection. You can have memory with the size of however much memory it is on one item, and then you can have a CPU for the next product, and you can have cores as a field on that item. So you can just create your schema on the fly as you go, and that brings us back to scaling. Obviously, it's really easy to scale because you can just create new fields as you go. Cost effectiveness. As I said, there's a lot of different areas where a company would save money if they use a NoSQL database. Scaling costs. Obviously, it's much cheaper to scale horizontally or scale out than to scale up. Alright, so it's easier to buy, it's cheaper to buy a commodity server and just add that as a node onto your network than it is to beef up an enterprise, a really huge enterprise powerhouse, adding CPUs and memory and all that. It's much cheaper and easier to scale out. Administrators. NoSQL is much easier to manage and takes less experienced administrators, so obviously you're going to save some money there as well. Hardware. With auto-sharding and horizontal scaling, it makes it easy so that we don't have to beef up servers. We can just add another node with commodity hardware. Alright, so that brings us to auto-sharding. NoSQL data can be spread across multiple servers. Yes, relational databases can do this, but not natively, and they need to use something like SANS or some other complex method to achieve it. Data can be balanced automatically across the server pool, and if for some reason one server goes down, it can quickly settle itself with little or no downtime. Alright, so you have much less downtime with NoSQL. And if we combine all that with a cloud solution like Amazon Web Services that can offer virtually unlimited space, we can leave it to them to handle those tasks. Alright, so this just makes everything very easy and reliable. So that's pretty much what NoSQL is and all the benefits of it. Obviously there are fallbacks. I should have added a slide in here for fallbacks, but we'll just talk about it real quick. One of the disadvantages of NoSQL is its age. It's obviously very new. Databases, relational databases, have been around for 30 to 40 years, and we know that we can count on them. They can be reliable, and people, developers themselves, are pretty much still in the learning stage for NoSQL databases, just because it's so new. You don't have anybody that has 25 years of experience with NoSQL. All right, so that's another advantage of relational database and a disadvantage for NoSQL. But as you can see, there's a lot more advantages than disadvantages. So that's it for this section. In the next section, I want to talk about the different types of NoSQL databases.